Yarg! Top of the morning to you, mateys. This be here, your good captain, Hell's Unicorn, to be going in another excursion into the fine world of pirating and buccaneering and all that other good stuff. Yarg! Okay, that's enough of that. Good evening, everybody. I'm back again, and man, I tell you, everybody is burned up right now over this recent Supreme Court ruling. Well, everybody except for me and a few other people who pretty well thought this was probably going to happen. You know, Ron Paul, I think himself pretty well said that regardless to whether or not the heart and soul of this bill, which was supposedly the individual mandate, was struck down or not, the problem would still have persisted. From my standpoint, in contrast to the so-called left, who I think are anything but, who are currently gloating about this, and the so-called right, who I believe are anything but, who are all upset over this, to me this is just another day. This is just another day in the funny farm, and it gets crazier and crazier in an incremental fashion. The question that everybody poses is this: does the government have the right to force you to buy a commercial good from a private entity? And the answer is, if you fully understand the current philosophy that dominates politics, the answer is absolutely yes. Our government is basically currently constituted on an arbitrary standard that can be moved around quite easily. The United States Constitution is a nice little plank on a platform whenever somebody's running for office, but it rarely translates into anything serious when people are actually voting on bills, with a few exceptions. The heart and soul of America at present, and I would argue that it's been this way for well over 150 years, I would argue more so in the case of New England and most of the so-called northern parts of this country, the heart and soul of America has been the majority that show up to vote get to fleece anybody they want. And when you get down to it, that's really what went on here. The difference is that a small group of very well-connected people in the insurance industry, coupled with a couple of very stupid ideologues with a pulpit, decided to fool a bunch of useful idiots into thinking that they would benefit by giving corporations the power to compel a fine or to throw us in prison if we refuse to pay that fine if we don't buy their products, so to speak. That's basically what car insurance companies do right now. Of course, they'll say, well, it's only an issue if you drive a car on a public road. Well, you know something? The minute I leave my driveway, I'm on a public road. I mean, the whole purpose of having a car is I've got to get from A to B, and if point B is somewhere beyond my driveway, I'm basically screwed. I've got to pay the protection payment to ensure that I don't get sent to prison by an IRS agent that ought to be flying under the banner of Jolly Roger, just like this current video is. And for the record, just to give everybody a little bit of background on this particular version of Jolly Roger, this is actually very interesting. This particular depiction of Jolly Roger is one of the earlier ones, and it was flown during the 5-month exploits of a particular pirate that was known mostly stateside here, particularly off the coasts of the Carolinas and Virginia, by the name of, let me see if I've got this right here, yeah, that would be Richard Worley. And Richard Worley, the legend is that after 5 months of successful pillaging, he ended up getting killed in combat because he mistook 2 warships sent out by the United States government for, you guessed it, merchant ships. Very fatal mistake. And if you look at the direction that America is going when you take into account the fact that they think that this current bill is a tax and yet it's also not a tax depending on the given day and whatever point's being argued, you could be argued that the current body politic of this government is Richard Worley on their way to meet with 2 very nasty warships and to get their clocks cleaned. And whether you believe the first story, which is that Richard Worley was injured but survived long enough to be hanged the next day, or if you believe he was killed in combat, the fact remains is that America is basically on a suicide mission because they think that 2 warships that are about ready to clean their clocks is a good, nice pile of booty right for the taking. You see, you can only fleece people in this country so long before bad stuff starts to happen. And this is the exact sort of nonsense that actually kicked off the last American Civil War that we had. Now, everybody likes to babble and whine and groan about the slaves and the slave masters and the racism and blah, blah, blah. For the state of Virginia, that was actually not the rationale for the war. The rationale was whether or not the United States federal government has the right to run roughshod over the Virginia state government whenever it so pleases, and as a result, trampling on the rights of everybody living in the state of Virginia. And the short answer was, since the Confederacy lost the war, the federal government has since been able to do whatever it damn well pleases, provided that it can convince enough of the northern states to go along with it. And that hasn't been much of a problem since the rise of red republicanism, or what I would basically refer to as neo-Jacobinism, here in these good old U.S. of A's. Make a long story short, what we're witnessing right now is the same sort of political situation that we had in the recent aftermath of the French Revolution. We have a very, very unstable agrarian action committee style government where property, albeit of a different sort, can be seized at the whim of whatever majority can manage to get itself to the polls, or can otherwise be fictitiously manufactured at the polling booths. So, while everybody in the so-called neoconservative side continues to whine on and on about what a miscarriage of justice this is, I just have one thing to say to you guys. Your hero, the guy that you put into office that was sticking it to the bad guys over in the Middle East, George W. Bush, he put into the Supreme Court the deciding vote on this particular issue, and on the immigration issue that you guys seem to care so much about. And you insist to this day that he was a great president and he was a conservative. And I don't know what kind of logical gymnastics you're going to try to do to maintain that viewpoint, but it's going to be an elaborate show, I'm sure. And for those of you on the other side of the aisle, currently on the Huffington Post or Truth Out or one of these other kooky blogs gloating about the great victory you've obtained, aren't you Occupy idiots supposed to be sticking it to the corporations or whatever business-oriented boogeymen you hate so much? I mean, fact of the matter is, this law basically makes it a crime not to buy something from a bunch of massive corporations, aka the insurance companies, which all you idiots claim are destroying the country and depriving people of the health care that they so desperately need. Man, the current climate in this country with regards to healthcare is a hypochondriac's wet dream. But to sum things up here before I go right now, I'm going to do another video at some point soon, either later this evening or sometime in the near future, where I'm going to discuss how I think it's possible for all of these irrationalistic idiots who are so enamored with one particular peripheral issue to become so dangerous to everybody else. I make distinctions between what would normally be dubbed fringe politics and outright fanaticism, and I think to a degree fanaticism has become institutionalized in our political discourse, to the point where people are willing to tolerate the worst of the worst in order to scrape one little smidget of an issue for themselves, be it one positive or negative, either so they can gain some sort of little trinket for their own keeping, or so they can stick it to some imaginary adversary that they've been mortal enemies with since time immemorial. So, in conclusion, I say this. Obamacare has been upheld. There's an election looming. Minimal change will probably be made, although I am hopeful that the Liberty Movement will have something to say on things from here on out. How much of a say is anybody's guess at this point. All I know is that I'm still going to be pushing to get that say as big as it can be. And hopefully, we'll come to a point where either we're able to salvage this train wreck or enjoy the fireworks and then push on to create something better. Until next time, with prudence to myself and benevolence to all of you, good evening.